Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox. Just got back from a party tonight. A friend of ours invited us over for a Christmas party. And so I've had a few Jello shots, but I wanted to do the news. So if there are any hang-ups, that's where it came from. Alright, so the first... Actually, I'm going to change this around a little bit. The first story is going to be from Robert Reich. I love Robert Reich. And in the last... he has a segment called Office Hours, and in the last segment he discussed the Trump administration coming in as an authoritarian regime. Essentially that many of the hallmarks that make authoritarian regimes in history have been parroted in the way Trump has essentially ran his campaign, and including the way he interacts with the press or interacts with people in general. I agree with everything Robert Reich said in that Office Hours. The one issue I take with is contextual. So it's somewhat implicit in the assumption of how bad Trump is that other presidents are not as bad, I guess. I mean, the assumption is, well, Trump coming in is the thing that's authoritarian regime. I made the contention that we were already there. Trump may be the new expression of it, but I think we're already there. So right now, as we speak, Robert Reich thought nothing was wrong with the word. Well, I'm not going to say that. That's wrong. That's hyperbole. He did not have this fear with Obama in office. I'll put it that way. But under Obama, 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's population in our prisons. Now, look, that wasn't Obama's fault. I'm just saying that was here before Trump took office. So that's the first point. The second point. Democrats under Bill Clinton. So let me make this first case. I make the case that Democrats were the expression of American will for the most part. And by that I just mean the poor, the workers, let's say 90% of the population. And I said it was their expression because Democrats were the party that was most receptive to the ills of that class or that group. I don't think that's necessarily a debate on that one. I think that's the way it is. At the very least, the way labor unions used to work with the Democratic Party. Under Bill Clinton, that was decapitated. That went away. And Bill Clinton took a lot of money, and he did a lot of nasty things. And he kept all of it coaxed in this folksy, I feel your pain language. Deregulating Wall Street had nothing to do with labor or the middle class or anything else. It makes buddies rich. Again, I'll keep going. I don't want to go too far into that point. But the disconnect between those two things, the fact that the Democratic Party no longer is responsive, well, if the Democratic Party is not responsive, the Republican Party damn sure is not going to be responsive. Then where is 98% of the population going to go? They have no voice. I mean, you may have a few people in Congress who are receptive, but as a whole, both parties take legal bribes and turn around and, for the most part, do the bidding of the people who bribed them. The bulk of the population does not pay attention to politics. So they're easily swayed when somebody comes in a really nice suit and says, hey, I'm doing this for you. And whatever voting trends they went along with in the past, well, they see it coaxed in the language of whoever that guy is talking to. So that guy can take a lot of money and do something different than what he's telling them. It's over 90%. Actually, over 90% of the races in Senate and House are won by the person with the most money. If you know that, who do you cater to? The people who are giving you the money, who's paying attention to what you're doing, and may have a financial interest tied into it, or the people who are not. The public is not, for the most part. Most people don't pay attention to politics. So again, we have a situation where there's a disconnect between what the public wants versus what the public gets. And you can go down the line. Guns, pot. In fact, even taxes. And I would make the case that taxes is probably the biggest one. The public says the rich should pay more. The government says, no, they should not. That's effectively what they say. When Obama went in office, he enshrined Bush's tax cuts. Well, again, the public didn't ask for that. He gave that. And he gave that to somebody. His donors. The people who gave them all that money, that $1 billion to run. So third thing, who the laws are for. Meaning, there's a distinct difference between how I would be, how I would interact with the law versus how somebody else with means. I mean, the person with means is going to have a much better lawyer. So right off the bat, he's a leg up. Second thing, people with means, for the most part, have a different way of interacting with the legal process. And I say with means, I just mean high up, not just somebody has a business and blah, blah, blah. I mean, Hillary Clinton skating on charges for what was in those Podesta emails and skating on the server. And look, I know a lot of Hillary supporters are like, oh, it's not a big deal, it's not a big deal. Look, man, I'm a software engineer. She had a server in her basement to keep people from prying into what she was doing. Which begs the question, why did she do it? What was she doing? What did she want people to see it? I don't think I'm crazy for asking that question. Not to mention, it was rank corruption in those emails. Look, I don't want Donald Trump to lock her up. I think that's insane. But I think it is crazy to look at those emails objectively and say, hey, that looks bad. That looks bad. That looks illegal. At least by any definition of illegal that most people will come up with. So, again, if I get stopped and I have pot on me, I might be going to jail that day. One, state secrets. Somebody potentially might have hacked those state secrets. Again, I have pot. Legal in 25% of the states in this country. But yet, I still might go to jail. Amazing. And the cop that takes me to jail might be an alcoholic. He might have just had a drink. All right, Robert. I hear you, man. I hear you. Look, when they abandoned the middle class, all of the high-minded talk of politics evaporated. It was gone. It wasn't a conversation among people with these principal positions. It was a conversation among donors. And, maybe one donor is more liberal in the sense of social liberality, I think people should be treated equally. All right, fair enough. But the thing that matters is their wallet. I make the case that a lot of the issues that we find, the ills of society, is based in poverty. People just not having the means to do what they need to do as people. And to be fair, Democrats haven't really addressed that issue. I don't even think Democrats say poor, outside of maybe like Bernie Sanders or something. That's the root of it. Now, you can put a bunch of money in the cops, or you can put a bunch of money into programs that actually help people that need it. One way or the other, you're spending a bunch of money. So it all depends on what you want to use it for. So, yeah, Robert, I agree with you. And there's one last thing. The political apparatus that we have in this country actively seeks to dissuade certain aspects of the population from voting. Whether that's the machines themselves that are just kind of faulty and don't have a paper trail, whether that's the way they scrub people off the voter rolls who are undesirables for their particular party, the way the states control the apparatus of who votes. I mean, it's amazing to me that you would let a Democrat or a Republican control the apparatus that decides who's going to continue running government. The Democrat or the Republican. It just seems weird to me. That's absolutely strange to me. I have a hand in doing this, but I give you my solemn promise that I'm not going to do anything to this process. Yeah, okay. Whatever, man. I don't believe you. And you should not... Look, that should be... My point is, if you're going to say you have a functioning democracy, then the aspects of that democracy should look like they're functioning. And it does not look like this is functioning. So, I agree with you that Trump coming in is not going to have any kind of political cadence. I agree with you. He may try all sorts of nasty stuff. And it is going to be up to people to not bow their heads, which they probably will. Which is why I agree with you. But I disagree with you in a sense that believing that what we had before Trump was somehow democracy, or somehow a representative republic. This is not a functioning democracy. Do you know there are thousands of people that they kept off the rolls? They didn't even want to have a recount. I mean, it's amazing. You have a vote, and the people don't want to make sure the vote is actually sound because they have an interest on which way that vote goes. They don't give a shit about the American public. They care about getting in office. So, yeah, Robert, I gotta disagree with you, man. Yeah, you can't call the system a function in democracy. Trump essentially rips the mask off the lie of Americanism. And you're looking in the mirror, dude, and you're not liking your reflection. That's what Trump is. So, all right. So, the next story that I'm going to go with, my neighboring state, West Virginia. All right. So, West Virginia, Joe Manchin, he wants another war on drugs. He wants a surge for a war on drugs. All right, dude, make your case. We need to declare war on illicit drugs, Manchin told CNN Jake Tapper on quote-unquote The Lead when asked what President Donald-elect should do when he addressed the opioid epidemic. What should Trump do? We need to declare another war. The first war that spent 40 years and, $1 trillion wasn't enough. We need to spend more money. Hey, isn't pot legal in 25% of the country? Wouldn't that indicate that war failed miserably? No. Surge. It worked in Iraq. Surge. All right. I hate this idea. The United States spends about $51 billion a year enforcing a war on drugs and arrests nearly 1.5 million people for drug violations. Mind you, many of these people are nonviolent. In fact, the overwhelming majority are nonviolent. They didn't do shit to anybody. They're in their car, they have jobs, they have lives. They're in their car, they're riding, they may have pot in the back seat or something. They get pulled over. They could have got pulled over for anything. It might have had anything to do with drugs. It might not have even had anything to do with the way they were driving. It might have been, oh, you got a bumper that's messed up. Hey, did you know your light was up? Is that pot in the car? I think I smell pot in the car. Sir, get out the car. Get out the car. Why are we fucking with people like this? And again, I gotta make this point. We're 5% of the world's population and 25% of its prison population in our cages. We have people locked in cages. Understand that. I can't get that across enough. And that blows my mind that people just be like, oh, people are in cages. But why are they in those cages? I mean, look, if you kill somebody, go get them. God bless. But if somebody makes a choice to smoke pot, hell, if somebody makes a choice to do coke, it's their choice. Their choice is not hurting me to be their choice. You know what is hurting me? Spending $51 billion. In fact, that stuff should be treated as a health issue. It should not be treated as a prison issue. We're exploding our prison population for no reason. And on the second point, Nixon aide reportedly admitted that the drug war was meant to target black people. It was actually a little bit more than that. They've been a little sensationalist. But blacks and hippies, in a nutshell. John Ehrlichman, who served 18 months in prison for his central role in Watergate scandal, was Nixon's chief domestic advisor when the president announced the quote-unquote war on drugs in 1971. So, in an interview, he essentially said, "You want to know what this really was about?" He acts with the bluntness of a man who, after public disgrace and a stretch in federal prison, had little left to protect. I love that. That's beautiful writing. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we could make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt both communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. The guy admitted Why are we still having this conversation? Let those people out of prison, man. Let those people out of prison. They should not be there. These guys conjured up a drug war for political expedience. They essentially was like, we are terrified that these guys are going to merge together and they're going to sink our chances. So they criminalized drugs and scapegoated both communities, locking them up purely for political ends. Nixon didn't give a shit about their families. They didn't give a shit about them. They were political problems. Why are we still talking about a quote-unquote drug war? Why are we having this conversation? We are locking Americans into cages for something that ultimately started off as a way to castigate blacks and hippies. It's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Joe Manchin, you're an idiot. I'm sorry, dude. You're an absolute idiot. Either you are so limited in your imagination that you can't come up with any other reason or any other way to handle the situation. Your first response is drug war, drug war, drug war. Is there anything that you can do other than a war? Hey, how about that? How about creative solutions to problems? I know I'm left field on this. I think all drugs should be legal. I don't think you should criminalize something and make a black market out of it. You deal with issues that arise from people doing it because people are going to do it anyway. No, I don't think we should have a drug war. The other one failed spectacularly, and that money was thrown down essentially a rabbit hole. We are the world's leader in prison population. We lead on that one. Go America. No, Joe Manchin, you're an idiot. Find another solution, dude. Your job as a congressman is to find solutions. But good solutions. Not shit like this. Not quick fixes, but actual solutions. I know it. Solutions are hard. But that's what you're paid for. That's what you're paid for. Anybody in their right mind could have told you that drug war was a horrible idea. But you said it anyway. So fair enough. Two more. Obama blocks Arctic and Atlantic drilling. Go, Obama. Good job. Fucking A, Barrett. Alright, and he does it in a way what is difficult to reverse. Oh, that's the spine! Why couldn't you do that on day one? What was this Obama? I wanted this Obama. President Obama will permanently ban offshore drilling in the most of the United States-controlled Arctic, as well as much of the Atlantic seaboard, the White House announced on Thursday. The move, billed as an effort to conserve important marine species and protect against oil spills, represents the last-ditch measure by Obama to strengthen his environmental legacy in advance of a President Donald Trump taking office in January. I love it. I love it. I feel a little something there when I see that. That's a spine, man. I'm going to now try to do something to prevent you from doing really bad things. In fact, there is no provision to get rid of it. Like, there is no straight quick fix to say, yeah, I'm undoing it. He's using this little-known 1953 law in order to pull it off. I love it. Now, could Congress, Republicans have the House, Senate, and the presidency, could they draft a bill and Trump sign it and then do it? Maybe. But right now, he's permanently banning those things. And so we're not going to have oil spills in the Arctic and the Atlantic. Thank you, Obama. Good job. And the last thing I'm going to do tonight is, wait until I'm tipsy. That's great. Race and politics. So, we have two original sins in this country. The first original sin was what Americans did to the Native Americans. At the point, Europeans did to the Native Americans. Howard Zinn's The People's History of the United States, I think that's the name of it, is brutal and painful to read it. It is literally genocide. From one coast to the other coast, we wiped out all of them and put them on these little plantations. And treaty after treaty, we ignored and took further and more land from them. Second one is what we did to us. to blacks. Bringing us over as, for the most part, cattle, and using us to essentially build their country. In many respects, you bring in slavery and everything else. You bring in the Reconstruction, and you bring in the white lash after the first Reconstruction. It seems like society has these things where it tries to push and then pull, push and pull. And look, race is one of those touchy issues, because everyone has these kind of preconceived ideas associated with any particular topic, and so any conversation you have is viewed through the lens of those preconceptions. So those preconceptions sometimes clash with one another, meaning, and look, sometimes it's not even preconceptions. Sometimes it's just feeling. Feeling is the first thing that ever happens to you before you think of anything else. Meaning, you respond first by how you feel, and the next thing is how you interpret that feeling. So, there are people who just hate other people because they're other people. It's that simple. And that is not a political thing. That is a consciousness thing. And that's just something they have to get past. I don't know how you get past that. I honestly don't. And however you need to bridge that gap, that's the difference in having a better country. And it sounds like I'm blaming whites, and that's not what it is. I'm saying that you have to ask the question, what would make somebody... First question, why do every other race line up with the Democrats? That's an interesting question. Why? I mean, what's this perspective from the races when they look at Republicans? And why do they see Republicans in a particular light? For blacks, it was the whole Southern strategy, essentially finding dog whistles to say that, hey, we don't like them either. Vote for me. I'm Richard Nixon. And further candidates, I would even make the case even Romney. Was doing the same thing, even though he was using it in a more coded way, because certain people, at least in this day and time, at least the way one of the Republican strategists explained it, yeah, you can't scream nigga, nigga, nigga anymore and get votes. It's too coarse. It has to be more finessed. So that's the first part. Second part, why? The Republican Party is clearly in the pocket of rich interests. Meaning that when you look at their policies, it's easy to see, well, look, this is what they want. They want more tax cuts for the rich and everything else. And regardless of what they're telling you, it doesn't really matter. You can look at their policies. What will make somebody vote against their own self-interest? Meaning, if it is against your economic interest, because these guys want to cut Medicare, Social Security, these guys want to cut even the least tepid environmental regulations. None of these things favor us. That doesn't favor the public at all. So what would make a thinking, rational person say, I am going to vote for something that's against my economic self-interest? Again, that's an interesting question. I mean, this election, one of the things that it ripped off the face was, yeah, we have some racist people in this country. Now, whether those people could be, you can bridge the gap with that, I don't know. Maybe. Because, look, my contention is that you might have 10% of people who were just racist and voted for Trump. And that the 20 to 50% was more so like, man, he's not going to do that stuff. I'm going to vote for him. And maybe I don't necessarily like the racial stuff, but I don't care enough about it where it wouldn't adversely, where I would give up my economic self-interest for it. So, in effect, yes, your safety matters less to me than my economic situation. And I gotta be honest, that hurts. Because when I saw Trump, I thought, there's no way America's gonna vote for him. Now, I looked at the map, and I said, I don't know how Hillary wins, but I thought, there's no way. It's too coarse. It was too racist. It was too over the top. But Trump won. I mean, you can bring in legal shenanigans with voter stuff and everything else, but at the very least, he had to be in the running to even do that, to win on the margins. So, this idea that we've changed fundamentally as a country, maybe the language has changed, but clearly those people are out there. And there was nearly half of the country voted. You can say that the other half of the country didn't vote, and maybe the other half of the country didn't regard it that way, and that's fine, and that may be true. But the first test, referendum on race in America, Trump won it. And look, I might be wrong. I could be biased on this front too. I mean, maybe it's not 10%. Maybe it's 30%. How do I know? I don't know. I don't want to think that it's 30%. So yeah, on the front, I am biased. But I make the case that if you can bridge the gap and you can talk to these people and you can kind of reach a meeting of the minds that says, look, our interests are the same. Even if you hate my guts because of how I look, our economic set of interests is tied to one another. Meaning, we don't go anywhere unless all of us go. And that's as true can get. So you can bash these people, you can browbeat these people, all of that. Good luck. But until you make the case and have an honest conversation. I mean, look, I don't necessarily like having all these conversations about race either. But I would have it, and I've had it in the past. And even with people who were conservative, who were like, I had a friend of mine, he asked me, he said, what is with this Black Lives Matter thing? They seem aggressive and you know, I think they're somewhat racist. And I was kind of having this conversation, like, dude, they're shooting us in the streets. What the hell are you talking about? Now, at that point, Brian doesn't like the cops either. So his response was, yeah, but, you know, I just don't like some of the stuff they said. Well, what did they say that you don't like? That's a conversation. That's a conversation. Now, when you get into other stuff, and he's like, well, I think blacks so-and-so. And look, be honest about the conversation. I mean, I'm not saying everything is going to be gentle and cuddly. But in that conversation, I kind of made this point to him, like, slavery lasted for what? 400 years. From slavery to like 1960s, there were Jim Crow laws. There was a time of Reconstruction, but between the backlash and Reconstruction and up to that point, Jim Crow laws. So what? Yeah, from 60s to 2000. From 60s to 90s. Or even from 60s, 70s, maybe to 80s. Where you could say society somewhat tilted in regards to African Americans. So from 80s to 2016, you expect a segment of your society that for the most part has been marginalized and treated unfairly in regards to the way criminal justice is applied. And look, this is based on stats. This is not based on how I feel about it. This is based on what literally is. Blacks have a 4 times higher likelihood of being locked up for drug possession, even though drug possession is across the board pretty much the same. So, not to mention we get longer sentences and all that stuff. Even the way resumes are, where depending upon the name you have on a resume, you get a call back. All I'm making the case is, there is such thing as being marginalized and deal with a headwind. And you expect something within the course of 30 years to have transformed the amount of capital we have in this particular society. Now, when you put it to him in that sense, if he's being honest, he's like, fair enough. That's a conversation. When I met Brian, Brian was a rabid, rights, conservative, states' rights guy. And yeah, he would never have voted for Hillary Clinton. But would he have voted for potentially against the Republican Party? Maybe, yeah, depending upon who it was. I mean, he was in a toss-up stage for the longest time. The idea that he was in a toss-up stage is in and of itself pretty amazing. And he's even said it himself that he's become someone a little bit more left based on our conversations. So, if you want a better country, you need to do one or two things. You either need to expand the playing field in regards to giving the people to vote who aren't voting, because only half the country voted. And I make the case that half of the country is further left than the Democratic Party and just don't care. They're like, look, I am so far left of where you guys are that I see no difference between you two. And I've talked to these people, and they will eat you alive in a conversation, and they will list your faults. And I've become one of those people. So you either need to do one or two things. Expand the playing field into those people, meaning you got to have a core. You got to be honest. You got to actually present an issue and stand for something. That's the only way you're going to get those people. Hell, that's the only way you're going to get me. The other part is having a conversation with these guys. If you can, look, man, if you can take the South, you've changed the country. Period. You've changed American politics. Now you can grow it where you let your population growth of Hispanics, blacks, and everybody else to the point where you just overwhelm the whites in those areas. Or you can have a conversation with those guys and try to bring them over to a point. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you have that conversation. But doing so changes the country. It fundamentally changes what this country is. Because at that point, you have a collective. You have the 90% of the population and that in unison says, yeah, we don't like this. We don't approve. We don't approve. So that's my spiel on race and politics. You got to have an honest conversation if you want to change the country. Because you can always divide up the segments of the population. Republicans having a message, well, they don't even need to have a message. At that point, if you're voting for them purely against your own economic self-interest, honestly, that blows me away. To this day, I don't fully understand that one. I can't imagine disliking somebody so much to the point where I just vote against my own interests. Others have just been tricked. Fair enough. Into thinking that they're going to be free marketeers and they're going to get a lot of money at some point, and they don't want those taxes. Fair enough. Many of those people just don't give a shit about anybody else, so they wouldn't vote Democrat anyway. They don't want their money being spent on things like feeding kids, or making sure everybody has health care. But there are people out there who would have responded to Bernie Sanders. Republicans, or people who lean to Republicans. Because A, they see him as honest, and B, they are hurting. And if you give them a message that says, hey, the government is actually going to work for you in this case, maybe they'll listen. Maybe you can bridge that gap. But until then, these are the politics that we have. So, alright guys, good night.